Hello and welcome to HealthTech Hour on UK Health Radio, the world's largest talk health radio. My name is Steve Roest, and every week on the show we speak to the CEOs, founders and leaders who are shaping the health tech landscape in the UK and beyond. I'm a CEO and founder of a health tech company myself, and I am passionate about the people and companies who are changing the world. Before we speak to this week's guest, I'd just like to remind everyone to follow at HealthTech Hour on Twitter and Instagram, and also follow at UK Health Radio to see who is coming up on the show. So today we have a fantastic guest on who is at the forefront of changing the perceptions, the diagnosis, and the care of women's health. Kathrin Folkendt is the CEO and founder of not one, but two companies, FemTech Insider, which is the leading platform for health tech for women, by women, and Perla Health, which is focused on redesigning care for polycystic ovary syndrome, or Pcos. Kathrin is producing an incredible series on FemTech Insider at the moment with Jenny Thomas. Now, Jenny Thomas is coming on the show next week, and she is the director of the Digital Health London Accelerator, and PocDoc, my company, are on the same accelerator, which is about trying to fast track health technologies into the NHS. So, Kathrin, welcome to the show. Pleased that you're on. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to share more about women's health and femtech and all the other things I'm very, very passionate about.
Great, perfect. So I ask everyone, given the general word situation, what's the mood in the camp? Where even in the world are you? What is going on?
Yeah, I'm currently based in Austria. I came back here. My parents live here, and I'm Austrian originally. And yeah, I mean, we're entering month 3 of lockdown. Just learned that our hard lockdown is being extended for a couple of weeks. And okay. Yeah, I have not seen a hairdresser in a very, very long time. But yeah, we're just like kind of trying to keep morale high among the team. Also, my co-founder Janine is currently in Vienna. And we are a UK company, both FemTech Insider and also with Perla Health, as you mentioned. Right. And yeah, can't wait to finally get there. But like plans are difficult in times of Corona. But yeah, we're trying to keep the spirit up.
And are you able to kind of keep working, during the pandemic, or has there been kind of bumps in the road for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously difficult to sort of, move into a remote collaboration model. And especially if you're building an early stage startup, sometimes it'd be just great to be in the same room and being able to whiteboard something and brainstorm and, just have these conversations that happen over a cup of coffee when you're maybe not necessarily, planning to, make those plans. Right. Yeah.
Scheduling Zoom calls the entire time.
Totally. But on the other hand, like obviously, and you probably know that as well. Health tech overall, the healthcare innovation obviously has gotten a huge boost through the COVID crisis. I mean, which is obviously bittersweet because we're still living it, and it's obviously horrible what the whole world and so many people are going for, so many lives lost, etc. For us, however, it's just kind of shown a lot of the weaknesses also in the healthcare systems that we have across the globe in different countries, and sort of how much need there is actually for innovation in this space. So
yeah, I think it's definitely been a double-edged sword. I would agree with you there. I mean, one of our advisors is a very senior GP, and he said he's seen more innovation in primary care in the last 12 months than he has in the last 12 years. So I agree. I think we're at the kind of forefront of this revolution, and the scale and pace of innovation is kind of scary at the moment in health tech. So the show, so far, we've been pretty good about sticking roughly to the structure. So the structure of the show is like the first bit is the origin. So how you came to be doing all the amazing stuff that you're currently doing. Then there's the middle bit, which is around all of the amazing stuff that you're currently doing. And there's a lot there because you've got FemTech Insider and you've got Perla. So I want to get really into that in detail. And then the final piece is what's the future for you, as well as us kind of discussing a few topics, trying to stay off of COVID if we can, just to maybe bring it up a bit, although it is kind of tough. So how did you end up, 'cause your background, I know, wasn't always in health tech. So how did you end up kind of making that journey? What was the motivation for you?
Yeah, as you said, my background is not in healthcare. My background is in tech. So I have spent pretty much my entire career working for various tech companies of all different shapes and sizes across Asia, Europe, also the US, so Silicon Valley. And I've spent a lot of time in B2B, spent a lot of time in software as a services.
Okay.
And during that time, at some point in my early 30s, so actually quite late in life, I was then diagnosed with a polycystic ovary syndrome, so PCOS. Maybe for those that might not know exactly what PCOS is, it's an chronic condition that is actually quite common among women. It affects approximately 1 in 10 women.
Right.
And it's an endocrine condition that causes all kinds of unpleasant symptoms, potentially infertility. Essentially, you have like heightened androgen levels. Infertility, weight gain, bad skin, hair loss, then hair in places where I don't necessarily want the hair, so male pattern hair growth, and also kind of a bunch of like complications that can occur if it's untreated. So it often leads to diabetes, cardiac problems, metabolic syndrome, fatty liver disease, and a much higher probability to actually get endometrial cancer, sorry. And it's very, very important to catch it early. It is pretty difficult to diagnose. A lot of women are not, around 50% of women with PCOS actually don't know that they have it. So they struggle with the symptoms. Many are turned away from their doctors.
Because they diagnose it as something else and just sort of...
so it's because the symptoms are so, varied, and like also not every woman with PCOS necessarily experiences the same symptoms. It is actually kind of difficult. So for example, I hadn't tried to have kids at the time when I was diagnosed. So, nobody ever,
tested your fertility.
I would never, struggle with fertility. So, I was never kind of checked for that. And then, I worked very hard with my diet and working out, etc., to sort of maintain my weight. So, I did kind of tick that obesity box either. So, and I'm like, look, I struggle with my skin. I have all these like symptoms. Something's wrong with me. I could just tell. And I was just told, it's a cosmetic issue. Just like, I don't know, anything from just deal with it to bad genes. And so here's the thing, like I'm Austrian, so I actually have access to really, really good healthcare. And, I've spoken to my doctors about those symptoms, and, it's hard to bring it up. Like, the hair and the skin and like, and it's, so many.
It's sort of like there's a stigma and it's...
totally. And, I kind of, especially, if you're told once that, you're exaggerating, like this is nothing, then, it's even harder to bring it up the second time. So literally, I eventually got diagnosed when I found a flyer at my beautician's office that, talked about sort of, PCOS, hirsutism, and like other like hormonal conditions. It was almost
kind of like by luck that you
completely, and so I, picked that up, and what one does, and started to Google on my phone about all these things, because I'm like, look, how am I a woman in my 30s and I've never heard about any of these things? And I talk a lot about women's health literacy also, about like how, whereas women were taught that women's health is, like stay on a diet and like work out, and that's how you're going to stay healthy. And I just, through that diagnosis, I really learned that there is so much more to women's health than just that. And so I started to learn about PCOS, because for my own sake in the beginning, and then just learned how much more there was to women's health, all these other conditions, all these inequalities. And so I got very interested in that space. And given that I had spent so much time in tech, that's always where my lens and sort of how I look at problems, like, through the eye of innovation, or, what can you build? What can you do to really, make a difference there?
What's amazing is that of all the, I mean, not just on the show, but just speaking to people generally, and I include myself in this, almost everyone I talk to that is in health tech generally has a personal story about it. About a reason why they're doing it. That's sometimes extremely personal, and such as yours, and Dan Rook, who came on, had another one. And it's I think that's one of the reasons why I find working in this space so inspirational, is because people are doing it to try and solve really big problems.
No, for sure. And, it's also, I think that personal story also keeps you going, because health tech is hard and healthcare is hard. And, I think that's Also me with a tech background, like building software and productivity software and things, that's all nice. But if you mess up, it's not as much of a big deal as it is if you mess up in healthcare. So it's kind of also making sure that you collect evidence and things like that. Like building digital health and is not an easy feat at all. So,
no, there's like a lot. I mean, we know as well from PocDoc. There's just such a huge. You can't apply the same. Oh yeah, just whack a product out there and it's V1 and okay, there'll be some problems and just iterate. It doesn't really fly because you're dealing with like the most sensitive aspects of someone's life.
Totally.
And, if you provide the wrong information or if you provide the wrong guidance or if your device doesn't work in the way it's intended and someone gets the wrong result or something, then it's a major problem.
Yeah, totally. No, I couldn't agree more. And nothing more.
When you were, because you and would you say that it was, if you hadn't have been diagnosed with PCOS, would you have made a transition into health tech eventually, or do you think it was this kind of epiphany almost that there was this huge need for innovation in this space that drove you?
My background had really been sort of in this B2B software as a services space, and that's also where a lot of my expertise was or still is also to a certain extent. And I think it was really sort of this big epiphany in a sense. And sort of, what happened with me was then once I was diagnosed and I learned more about women's health, I started to track all these companies.
Yeah.
And, sort of not really with the intention to, get into digital health or health tech at the time, but it was really sort of, who's working on these things? That's so interesting. And then my sort of big moment really happened beginning of 2019.
Okay.
So there was an infamous report by Frost and Sullivan that came out that sort of spoke about the, business opportunity in FemTech and, 50 billion by 2025, et cetera. I mean, I'm always a little bit skeptical when the numbers are too pretty in a sense that it might be a little bit
and it's convenient that it's like a nice round 50 bill, right?
Totally. Yeah. But anyway, so like it kind of put femtech on the map, and there was a little bit of attention by both press and also by VCs, and I was like, that's so cool. This space that I've been tracking for a while now is getting a little bit of attention. And so I was like, where can I go and actually learn more and find out more? And there wasn't really a place. And what, for me, it was so weird because, having that background in software as a services and also fintech a little bit, I'm like, I don't know how many blogs there are about like fintech and software as a services.
There's a lot of content out there that people produce. It's a big community.
Yeah, totally. And I was like, I mean, women's health, it affects 50% of the world's population. And there isn't like a single platform that's really talking about this.
And that's where you came up with FemTech Insider.
Correct. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So that's what. So just for everyone listening, and also to be honest, would kind of be slightly helpful for me. It's like what do you believe is the definition of femtech versus women's health tech versus women's healthcare, or like how do you sort of navigate through all of that, and how do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question. And I mean, it's also like, in a sense, it's so weird because it's a somewhat controversial topic because femtech, it's not an ideal world. And there's a lot of people that argue by, speaking about women's health innovation as femtech, it sort of, minimizes it. Like I personally also use the word man tech for, like, for example, male contraception, etc. So for me, it doesn't really have that that connotation in a sense. That's also.
You think there are some people that say femtech is somewhat. What's the word? Like, what did you say?
It's like sort of like sort of minimizing what it is, and it's sort of why don't we just call it health tech, which I think is super valid. The reason why we still call FemTech Insider is because it sort of allows us to rally around something and sort of kind of collect the women's health innovation. Yeah, correct. Yeah. So it's kind of, it's something that people somewhat know and sort of associate with women's health innovation, but it's also not perfect because then you have a lot of people that hear femtech and are like, oh yeah, that's about female founders, right? Or they're about women in tech.
I completely, exactly. That's kind of why I asked. So do you think it's sort of, because femtech doesn't necessarily have any like inherent reference to health in it. So like I hear some people, I have seen it used around just female founders of companies or female CEOs, and it's got nothing to do with health.
Yeah, no, totally. And as said, like I think it's definitely not perfect. And like what I've kind of try to do is to always, speak about FemTech and women's health innovation to sort of, kind of put that disclaimer there. Right. And I also what the things we discuss on FemTech Insider are not necessarily always digital health. We also speak about life sciences. We speak about policy. We speak about access. Generally, anything that affects sort of this very broad spectrum of women's health, like the definition. And I also is, often when we speak about women's health, even, we sort of try to limit it to, in our mind, it kind of gets limited to fertility or menstruation. And it's so much broader than that. It's conditions that on the one hand, yes, solely affect women, but it's also conditions that maybe differently or, affect women more or in other ways. So, kind of looking at mental health, brain health, Alzheimer's. The Women's Brain Project based out of Switzerland is doing amazing research and work in that space. So I think, we need to just think that whole women's health much broader than we are. Yeah. And specifically with FemTech Insider, we've also been doing some work on sort of the consulting and training side with, speaking to VCs and a lot of other kind of stakeholders in that space to really speak about this. Look, women's health. So
to try and educate people about the space.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. About just the space, because there's, frankly, we always sort of have this limited view of where the opportunities are, what excites me so much about, working in women's health innovation is that I feel it's such a great opportunity to really move the needle for 50% of the world's population, while at the same time really building great businesses. And, frankly, what VCs are interested in is making a lot of money. And I think that's definitely also possible in women's health. I mean, as a patient, maybe not it'd be nice, to eventually make a little bit of money, but my primary motivation is really to kind of, solve this problem that I've personally experienced for, women like myself. And I've spent a bit of time with FemTech Insider sort of also, speaking about this, that, there's more to this than just fertility and menstruation. Let's look beyond that, look at companies building other things. And we unfortunately talk about that, sort of that's going back to the women in tech or women in the sort of the startup scene. And, there's not too many women in VC that potentially, sort of have a personal relation to some of the problems that we address.
So we're kind of jumping around a bit, but one of the questions, it's cool. One of the questions that I have is around how because I know that we spoke before this show to plan it a bit. And one of the things that which I think is really interesting, is that your belief that the current healthcare system and the current sort of tech landscape has created a set of needs within women that are completely underserved. Well, it's not created, or that there are a set of needs that are underserved currently, both from companies, from investors, and from the healthcare system. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Because I think that that's really interesting, and particularly around whether that underserving, is that because of where does that sit in terms of, is it that women are certainly, as you said, somewhat afraid or concerned about being able to speak about certain things, so it's more of an education demand issue? Or is it more that there just aren't enough women starting companies to address these issues and people funding them, or both?
Yeah, so I think, it starts even earlier. So, with women's health, often we struggle with research and, even how much we know about women's health overall. So, from my experience working in PCOS, at this point in time, we don't know what causes PCOS, and there's also no cure. And, there's
are there treatments, or are there?
It's largely, so you treat the symptoms, essentially. That's either lifestyle modification or also medications like, birth control, metformin, etc. But it's if you have PCOS, you're pretty much stuck with it, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to best live with it.
Right.
So generally, as said, and there's also not a lot of money spent on PCOS, women's health research overall. So one thing that we do struggle with is also, and also impact. So, the latest data, for example, for the US that we found on the kind of impact of PCOS on the healthcare system is from 2009. And, that's not because we didn't try to and look very, very hard, but it's just that's kind of the latest there is. And so, then, you're kind of in a position having to make business cases and, sort of basing things on data. And
where do you attribute that lack of research to? What do you believe are the causes of that?
Yeah, I mean, we've always seen a lot of men in leadership, sort of,
Right.
and in deciding positions, both in healthcare and also in the tech space,
And in academia as well, presumably.
correct, yeah, and it's kind of we always have this mirroring issue, right? Like you research what you understand and what you're interested in, and unfortunately, women's health hasn't kind of made the I don't know, top 10 list there for the longest time.
Yeah.
I mean, we're seeing a lot of I mean, women, it's like really about stepping up, advocating for yourself, and I think also in terms of speaking about that on an awareness level, even, just as, I mean, I'm a patient, so in the first place, and sort of as a lay woman in this context, it's sort of speaking up about these things, and you're almost ashamed of these conditions that you had.
Right.
It's really stigmatized, and it's we don't hear about it in the media, we don't talk about it, and then well, then maybe it's not that much of a problem. So why would we, kind of research this, fund this?
So it kind of all feeds into each other. So it's
correct,
sort of like the stigma about it kind of depresses the demand for that service somehow.
Yeah, it's a systemic problem. And so, it's always like kind of pretty difficult to, point the finger and be like, yeah, that's the problem. And that's the problem. It's kind of sort of a bunch of factors that have led to the position that we're in. But yeah, I mean, I've tried to be optimistic and hopeful, and we see more action in this space lately. So that's quite promising, I feel.
And so when did you make the decision to just move from doing the FemTech Insider platform, which I think is awesome, and my co-founder Kathrin is going to be on it, I think, this week, which we're excited about. When did you decide to move from that to actually founding a company that was trying like the Perla Health that will make an impact on how people are cared for, or the care pathways for PCOS?
Yeah, so I never really wanted to found a startup because I know that startups are really, 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 really hard.
Yeah, there's an element of that for sure.
Yeah, and so what happened was I started to talk to my co-founder at Perla Health, Janine, who maybe she's listening, who's very, very awesome.
Hi, Janine.
Hi, Janine. So she, her background is in pharmaceutical science, and she worked for a pharmaceutical company, then sort of in digital health for that digital health company, and sort of in the virtual clinic space there. And, we just started chatting, by now it's like more than a year ago, about sort of just our joint interest in the women's health space. And, we just kind of developed a friendship, and just, kind of exchanged notes and thoughts and stories. And at some point, Janine asked me, well, Kathrin, you see so many decks going through your inbox with FemTech Insider, and
it's a great way to see what's going on.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, for sure. And she asked me, well, Kathrin, if you were to start a company, what would you do?
Yeah.
And I told her, well, Janine, I see so many, kind of more of the same projects, and kind of sort of.
What's the most common thing that you see?
Yeah, so I see a lot of just more menstruation tracking apps. I see a lot of sort of D2C delivery, like companies being it, like, not even like so much the pharmaceutical science, but like women's hygiene. So like anything from pregnancy tests, birth control too. Birth control is a big topic.
But there's not much, do you find, because obviously PCOS is a very specific condition.
Correct, yeah.
Is it that there's a lack of things coming through for specific conditions? It's more general.
Yeah, so totally. And so, this is kind of also how the conversation with Janine and I went on, because I looked at Janine, like, I see all these things, and like, I have PCOS myself. I know it's a huge issue. I know it really impacts you. I know it affects 1 in 10 women. I don't necessarily know how to solve for it, but I know there's definitely a problem there. And I mean, when it affects that many women, then there's also a market. And so, we sort of had that moment where we sat back and we're like, oh, Janine has all this like sort of background in the virtual health or like digital health virtual clinic space. And sort of, I understand this from a patient perspective. And so we started to just like, research it a little bit more, talk to a lot of patients, lots of providers, tons of researchers.
So it's 1 in 10 women have PCOS.
Correct, yeah.
So is that something like 3 or 4 million people in the UK?
Yes.
Somewhere in that range. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, and what currently, how would you currently describe the traditional or existing care pathway for someone for someone with PCOS?
Yeah, so maybe let's start with the diagnostics. So the diagnostics are actually quite complex because, as mentioned, first of all, you actually need to find a provider that tests you for it, or is like, oh, maybe that's PCOS. So
is there a single diagnostic test, or is it a combination of different markers and things to look at?
Yeah, so it's a combination of different markers, and so they are referred to as the Rotterdam criteria. There's three. So one is elevated androgen levels, which is either a hormone test or just also clinical observations. So, like excess body hair or acne or things like that. That could be indicators for heightened androgen levels. The second thing is irregular menstruation and ovulation, which can be self-observed. And then the third thing would be the polycystic ovaries, which is a transvaginal ultrasound. That needs to be done. And in order to be diagnosed, you need to have 2 out of those 3 indications. And it does not matter which 2. And again, going back to the research bit, we do not know a lot about, whether it matters which 2 you're diagnosed with, and whether there's a relationship between what you're diagnosed with and what symptoms you show. So, we really have a lack of just research and knowledge there.
And is there a range of severity of symptoms, or is it all everyone has a relatively similar level of symptomatic sort of expression of the condition?
Yeah, no, it's very, very different from woman to woman. So, some might not struggle with some of the symptoms at all. So it's kind of the first question that we tend to ask also at Perla is sort of, what symptoms do you have? And then also what symptoms bother you? Because, if you're still younger, then, maybe infertility, you don't really want to talk too much about, sort of PCOS in the context of fertility and having children, and might potentially even be triggering to sort of bring that up again and again. Whereas, somebody that's maybe a little bit older, that's like the main kind of symptom that they're struggling with. Maybe they, are struggling with their weight and, maybe also with bad skin, but they're like, look, I don't care about any of these things. Like, what's really bothering me is sort of this struggle to conceive. And so, it's super important with PCOS to kind of really understand where the woman is at, what's bothering her, also what her goals are and what she's trying to achieve. Like, it's super difficult. One question that we've spent a lot of time on, what does it actually mean for a woman with PCOS to feel better and get better, sort of, because there isn't like, a hormone test I can do or something that.
And there's no wonder drug to fix it.
Correct. So. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, you really need also providers. And unfortunately, we have a bit of an issue also with the understanding that providers sometimes have of that condition.
And how would you, so in the UK, because I know that you're a UK company,
correct,
looking across Europe and I assume the US as well. When a woman goes to her GP, her general practitioner, presents with some of these symptoms, how have you, because I'm guessing, have you done sort of research and spoken to a lot of people? What does that pathway normally look like? Do they normally get kind of sent away, as happened to you a couple of times, and they have to go back a 3rd time or a 4th time and sort of push it? Or how does it, what's your view currently of the pathway?
Yeah. So unfortunately, what we see is that women see up to like 8 doctors before they actually get diagnosed. So it's pretty
that's a lot.
Dark. And it's also like, there's this whole question that you keep asking yourself, well, why am I struggling with all these symptoms if nothing's wrong with me? Like, what am I doing wrong? So you're really like looking for the fault in sort of your own kind of habits, or sort of how am I causing all these things? So and then generally what will happen is that depending, like, it's either the primary care provider or the gynecologist, or like maybe sometimes an endocrinologist that will sort of diagnose this, depending on sort of how, like, a gynecologist will potentially do it.
There's no clear pathway for diagnosis either. It could be diagnosed by a number of different people.
Correct. Yeah. It's really like whoever catches it. And I think also like the treatment that women receive is then largely dependent on which provider kind of, does this diagnosis. The ideal pathway. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so, we really see a very provider-centric care that is currently happening, and not really a patient-centric care. And so this is, I think, where we're really hoping to make a difference.
Okay. So let's talk about how Perla is solving these problems. What is Perla doing?
Yeah, so as mentioned, we're very, very early stage. So, these
Yeah.
things that
Oh, yeah.
still
And
all.
if there's like secret squirrel stuff that you can't talk about.
Yeah, no, for sure. But yeah, so generally, what we do know is that sort of the best in class care is really an integrated care, where so the first thing is really, let's make sure that the women that have just been diagnosed have a very good understanding of the condition and how it affects them and what it is and what it is not. So sort of what Perla is right now is really an educational platform that we started with that because so when I was first diagnosed, as mentioned, I started to Google, and I'm also part of a lot of kind of patient support groups, and have been for a long time. And on the one hand, it's been wonderful and to receive all this support and sort of kind of find other women that struggle with the same. And I'd always thought that all of the things that were happening to me and that I couldn't understand about my body and like health and well-being were my fault, and I was causing this. And just like, it's a big relief to know, well, there's actually reasons for this, and I can get help and I can feel better.
Yeah.
And so just being in this kind of in a community of women that understand was huge for me. However, there's a bit of an issue with, well, I took a zinc supplement and then 3 days later I was pregnant. So let's all take zinc supplements. So there's a lot of information that might not necessarily be evidence-based.
Disinformation or fake news.
Correct. Yeah. And so that's why we really started with sort of information that you can trust, like, everything's kind of research backed that you find on Perla Health. So, we're really, really super.
Do you have a clinical kind of partner or advisor, or is your co-founder the clinical person that's validating all of that information?
Yeah, so at the moment, Janine is kind of, really driving that process, but we are working with partners. So, as mentioned during sort of the research phase for Perla, we spoke to a lot of providers in this space who are sort of helping us just because they really believe in this mission, and are also helping us make sure that, whatever content you find on Perla is sort of up to the really, really highest standards. So we offer this, and then also there's an asynchronous telehealth model that we offer at the moment, which is kind of not very structured. So it's kind of based on this network that we've been able to build out with providers with different specialties. It's possible to ask.
Are there PCOS specialists, or does it end up under gynecologist or endocrinologist or? Yeah.
So I mean, there isn't really sort of a PCOS specialist. There are a few sort of KOLs and research centers around the world. There's 2 of them, I think, in the UK and 10 in the US. And those are, again, in the US, they're largely on the coasts. So how big is the probability that a woman that's diagnosed with PCOS sort of lives near one of these centers? But so all the providers that we work with, or that are sort of in our network, kind of have an understanding of PCOS. So they've been vetted, and it's not just sort of anyone, but it's kind of, they understand PCOS, and so no woman will be turned away, if there's like.
Yeah, they're not going to end up in a video consult with someone that tells them that it's something else.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. Okay. And where do you hope that where's the vision for the?
Yeah. So, I mean, the vision is really to kind of, help women across their entire journey and sort of across this whole pathway. And we're building that out at the moment. We definitely do believe in this integrated care model, where sort of, a central person, be it like a care navigator or sort of PCOS nurse, whatever you want to call that sort of helps navigate this whole process. So I think one thing that a lot of women with PCOS struggle with is they're diagnosed and then they leave the doctor's office and they're on their own.
So congratulations, you've got PCOS.
Yeah, now go away.
I can see that.
And so it's kind of, that's, I think, like also where we want to come in of being like, look, this is sort of what that actually means. Like, I'm known for TMIs, but like when I was first diagnosed, I was like, I talked to my boyfriend, I'm like, look, I can never have children, and like it's not true. But like that was sort of what I thought at the time, just because that's sort of what I had kind of heard or read or like picked up somewhere, and you're just like lost in the middle of all this misinformation, and panic, and so it's kind of really just like also.
Yeah, I think it would be. I mean, like I know that you know Jenny from the operator, but if there are 3 million women or 3 to 4
Yeah.
million women in the
Yeah.
UK that are suffering and
Yeah.
are sort of being diagnosed on an ongoing basis,
Yeah.
kind of forever, if that makes sense, because
Yeah.
it's sort of 10, 1 in 10 women, then
Correct.
having some kind of, because I would imagine most of them get diagnosed through primary care or some kind of something like that. Having that pathway would be quite helpful for a GP, I would think, because there's probably a lack of information at that level of what they should do. So if they have a service that they can sort of direct people off to at that point that are specialists, I think that might be something that would be very interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, there are sort of treatment pathways for PCOS out there. Also, in sort of the NHS. The struggle that we do see is that it's not really integrated. So it's kind of again, we're treating those symptoms, but not the person. And sort of we're also not, the pathway is also not designed to sort of treat the woman sort of just in an integrated way,
like
or
a holistic way, you mean?
Correct. Yeah. And also in the context of PCOS especially. So it's kind of then it's like, okay, so now we know this, so now you're going down the fertility pathway, which is again like a completely different thing, but it's never kind of in the context of the chronic condition.
So what it sounds like is that there's sort of some very specific biological issues that can be treated. Some can't, some can, but then there's actually a much larger issue of mental health associated with PCOS.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
How does that person deal with that condition? And that, it sounds like that really isn't being addressed at all in the current treatment pathways or clinical pathways.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
It's like sort of this education, and also just like sometimes you come up with with questions that are not necessarily medical, like it's sort of, okay, I'm going on a date and there's this guy I really like, and now I need to talk about like PCOS and that potentially it's going somewhere, and I need to talk about that. It might be a little bit more difficult for me to potentially have children. So how do you start a conversation like that? And it's sort of sometimes the problems that women with PCOS face are not necessarily medical, but it's also, or like also there's a lot of cosmetic issues, so the acne, and then like you talk about electrolysis and like hair loss and sort of skincare and things like that. So it's sort of this whole spectrum of health that if women like for me, when I was diagnosed, I didn't even know who to talk to or sort of what that meant,
where to even go.
Correct.
So, it sounds like Perla is doing an incredible job about trying to be that hub for people. I think that
we hope so.
And so what are the next kind of steps for you guys in that journey with Perla?
Yeah, so we're actually quite excited at the moment because we are joining an accelerator program. It's one of the first FemTech, so women's health specific FemTech accelerator programs.
FemTech and health together.
FemTech and health, correct. So women's health innovation. And so that's at Station F, which is actually I think the world's biggest startup campus in Paris, in France. Ooh. And so we just kind of the program kicked off last week, and both me and my co-founder Janine are looking to relocate to Paris to kind of join that program in person if Corona allows.
I hope so. That would be incredible.
Yeah, before we eventually also try to make our way back to the UK.
Come back.
But as said.
Okay, so so there's the accelerator, and then what's the kind of goal or the end point after the accelerator?
So for us it's really kind of building out that MVP, and we will be looking to fundraise after that also probably. And so for us also, I know we don't want to talk too much about COVID, but
please. I mean, it's hard to ignore,
Yeah, totally. I think for us, like what has been a bit of a challenge has been working remotely and kind of just not having other founders around to just ask quick questions. And so what we really like about sort of this program that we're in is that because there are so many startups there, and the idea behind Station F is really that, look, 90% of all problems that startups face can probably be solved solved by other startups, or at least they might have some advice on how to go about it. And so we definitely believe in that. And I've spent a lot of time in co-working spaces over the years, and I'm a huge fan of sort of those collaborative loose tie models, or you just sort of know what that person does, and you're like, hey, can you just help me with this or that? And so we're just like really kind of looking forward to being part of a cohort of other founders that are looking in a similar field and might be struggling with similar problems or challenges, and even just when you have successes as a founder,
just sharing this,
just sharing that,
celebrate
and
with, as opposed to just being in the basement the entire time.
Yeah, no, totally. And it's even, Janine and I, we had a few, good moments as part of that ride. And it's like, then, you're like, maybe have a drink over Zoom, and then it's like you switch off and you're like, okay, and now I'm alone again. And you sort of crash a little bit. So yeah, we're really, really excited to kind of, have a community, really.
Okay. So on FemTech Insider, what are some of the best stories that you've come across that otherwise might not have got out there? So it could be like companies that you've come across, or just individuals. So what are those stories that you feel like you've amplified, otherwise they wouldn't really have kind of gotten out there?
Yeah, so I think like one thing that I'm very proud of is that we catch startups quite early.
Okay.
So I think we have a very, very in-depth database of sort of startups in this space and a good overview. And I don't want to say too much, but we're going to launch in the next 1 or 2 weeks. So we are going to work with a data partner to sort of, kind of make that experience even better.
Okay. Cool.
And overall, what I'm super excited about is that, we're really welcoming enough that people feel free to reach out with their, I'm launching this. Can you just, help us get the word out? And sort of we have over the years really created a sort of a mailing list of thousands of, really.
Yeah, you've got thousands and thousands of followers.
Yeah.
So what are the kind of, if you had to pick some of the highlights, of the really cool things that you think, oh my goodness, thank goodness someone is looking at that, and that is awesome? Yeah,
it's so hard to like really pinpoint that one story.
Well, you can have as many as you want. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I know that you said you get a lot of stuff that's generalized. But or another way to think about it would be, what have you seen or come across any companies or anything that's focused on specific conditions that you think is actually something that's worth sort of shouting about or talking about?
Yeah. So, I mean, what I'm personally always super excited about is any innovation in the gynecological health space that is not necessarily related to reproductive health. So, anything that's kind of addressing PCOS, obviously, which unfortunately there's not a lot besides us, endometriosis. So, anybody who's innovating in the endometriosis space excites me a lot.
Are there people innovating in that space?
There are. There's a few apps that are, kind of helping with pain relief. I mean, endometriosis, again, it's a huge issue. So it causes, really extremely painful periods. And it takes up to 8 years for a lot of women to actually get diagnosed with this.
Wow.
Because they are sent away and they're like, a period is supposed to hurt.
Wow.
And then, you're just also, as women, sometimes we're just like accustomed to just accept pain or like discomfort as normal. So, you're just, and, if you're told 2 times, well, that's normal, don't worry about it, you just don't bring it up again.
Okay.
But yeah, so endometriosis, I'm very excited about.
What kind of, how are those guys improving the treatment or care of endometriosis?
Yeah. So I think it's really pain management.
Okay.
For a lot of these companies through various different things. Like I've seen some interesting approaches through just also cognitive behavioral therapy of like, just kind of other things. Also education. Again, a lot of companies in that space are also working on education, on awareness, on, helping women to better advocate for themselves.
Okay.
When seeing doctors and,
so they're more educated so they can sort of talk to the doctor in a way so they don't get kind of fobbed off and sort of told to go.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm also very, very, so gynecological health overall, there's also, a lot happening in the pelvic health space. Lots happening on PMDD, which is also very painful sort of PMS symptoms, more painful than usual. Also, where a lot of women are just, it's just in your head, just deal with it. So, anything that's like kind of pain related, and, sort of, helping women to actually get diagnosed. No, they're not alone. No, this is a real thing that they're experiencing, and it's not something that you imagine.
It sounds like a lot of these are very educational based. Is that because the market is so new and the problems are so underserved that you're still in the phase where you're just trying to educate people and break down stigmatization around these issues so that people talk about it more and there's greater awareness?
Yeah, so I think there's multiple reasons for this. So I think the first thing is that education is totally important. So that sounds really weird. But yeah, it's very
I agree. Education is important.
Totally important. But yeah, so I think it's like kind of where we start from, because there's so little out there that's actually trustworthy information in a lot of these spaces that we operate. And then also there's a lot of women that actually don't necessarily know they have these conditions, because they just think this is normal and this is how things are supposed to be. And then another thing that we do see is that in this space is that you have a lot of very, very mission-driven founders and female founders that, as you mentioned, that are potentially affected by these problems that they are trying to solve for. Yes. And those women like myself often come with a sort of from non-traditional backgrounds in this space. Yeah. And that's sort of where you start, and sort of what you can also kind of when you're bootstrapping, we see funding is picking up, but like it's still definitely not where it should be, like when we compare funding into women's health.
Is that, let's be honest about it, is that because most investors funds are male dominated, do you think? Or
yeah, I mean I don't necessarily like this narrative that it's like sort of the male investor's fault, because also through the work that we've done with FemTech Insider, it's I've seen that there's a lot of male investors that are really, really genuinely interested, but are also like sometimes a little bit concerned about maybe saying something stupid or kind of frankly not understanding the space, and then like not exactly knowing where to go to ask these questions. So in those workshops, it's actually great, because like I get these questions, I'm like, look, just ask, it's fine, like there's no judgment here. That's why we're here to like get these answers. And I absolutely, like, I would love to also I love seeing a lot of men that are very supportive of this space, and like there's so much to do. And while I do believe that we need to see these products being built largely by women, just because the lived experience is so important. I definitely think that we need all these allies to help us move the needle on this. And
I can relate to your point around as a man not wanting to be insensitive or make a mistake or say the wrong thing. I totally get that. And I think it's probably unrealistic to expect that there's going to be this kind of huge swing of sort of investors. Suddenly there'll be 50% of investors or VCs that are female. So I do think it's what you're doing with FemTech Insider and just in general in terms of educating them, and also trying to almost take the awkwardness out of those conversations so that they feel capable or able to ask questions, and it's not going to offend anyone, or they're not going to put their foot in it. I think that that's really, really critical, so that they can approach the businesses just like any other business.
Totally. And like, would I love to see like more representation of women in VC? For sure, but I'm also realistic enough that we can't wait for that to happen. And we're like, I really think that you need to work with what you have. Every day you wake up and you just like sort of work with what you have, and sort of that's also how I try to approach these things, and sort of how can I help. We're obviously all trying to work towards a more balanced sort of in VC and at like sort of on the leadership levels of various companies in tech among founders, but you got to start somewhere. And like I'm always a very big sort of default to action person, and I can sit here and complain that the things are the way they are. Unfortunately, they are the way they are. And sort of then I'm like, well, how can I actually contribute to making a bit of a difference? And
instead of just sort of standing on the sidelines, you're right in the midst of it, trying to change it and also work with what you've got at the same time. So I think that makes a lot of sense. So what, as a founder, you kind of alluded to it at the beginning, where you've got a lot going on, and I know that you're very interested in this sort of founder health, particularly from a mental health perspective. So how have you found your journey from working as an employee in a number of tech companies to being the founder of not just one but two tech companies?
So it's I've been around startups a lot, and it's always like when you're on the outside looking in, it's always like, yeah, why don't they do this? Like, this is definitely the direction these people should be taking. And it's when you're in this position and you sort of really understand these problems and sort of all the things that need to be done, and the complexity of sort of and especially the complexities in healthcare.
Yeah.
The complexities that are involved in sort of the work that we do. You're really kind of understanding why sometimes you have these moments of looking around and being like, okay, what's the right next thing to do now? And especially when you're very, very early stage and bootstrapped, and you're obviously very, very I try to be very, or pay a lot of attention to where I put what I focus on, or also what we build, sort of what the first things are, etc. Because I said we're only looking to raise a first round. And so at the moment it's really about kind of also collecting evidence, making sure that people understand this works. But it's really rough, and sometimes I got into and in the beginning, especially when after I think like half a year after we started Perla Health, in the beginning I felt completely invincible. I'm like, I can work the weekends, and it's like it's gonna be fine. Yeah, and all this exhaustion, it happens to other people, but I'm so mission driven, and this is so important to me, and I can do all these things. And so I learned that I am not invincible, unfortunately. So I really kind of went through this phase, I think last fall, when it was just really, really difficult. And we kind of started to speak more openly about what we're doing with Perla and had a little bit of press coverage. And that was sort of, we worked towards that moment, and then I just crashed.
Collapsed.
And that's also and we don't talk about this a lot, because it's like, if as a startup founder you need to be strong, and you always need to have things together, and you need to be that.
There's the cult of the kind of like rock star founder type thing, isn't it? Where do everything, sleep 4 hours a night, do intermittent fasting, sit on a beanbag or whatever. There's that sort of image where it's all well and good if some people can do it, but probably doesn't work for everybody.
No, totally. And it's like, I'm really fortunate that I had some people in my network that have founded and also exited companies. And one friend, also from my sort of software as a services past, but he sends me every 3 weeks, he sends me an email: how's your mental health doing? How are you doing? Are you taking good care of yourself? And I appreciate it so much. And sometimes I even don't reply back, because I'm just like so in it, and I'm like, look, I'm so sorry, but all of these things are happening. But it's just like really that wonderful reminder. And he said to me, Kathrin, and I'm like, I need to help all these women, and this is so important to me. But the truth is, if I'm not okay, and if I'm not well, then I can't, you
can't do anything.
You can't do anything. And I think I've really learned to appreciate that over the past year, that it really starts with me, and with me taking care of myself better, and with me managing my emotions, and managing my imposter syndrome, and managing all these things. And it's really I think founder mental health and personal growth is so incredibly important to the growth of a startup. And so I've really I'm trying to do a lot of work on this. And obviously it's an ongoing process that's probably never going to be finished, but just even recognizing that this is important, and also kind of checking in.
What are the what's the one or two things that you try and do to kind of manage it as best as possible?
So I've learned a lot about myself, also sort of through using different behavioral health techniques. So I'm a huge proponent of also an app called WooBot. It's a Stanford project, and it's kind of it talks you through things. It asks you what are you grateful for? Sort of even just seeing these things. Sometimes when I get nervous about something, and kind of, okay, are you really nervous? Is this really as terrible as you think it is? Or are you just kind of catastrophizing, or making this into something, or kind of trying to read other people's minds, and you kind of, your mind sometimes wanders off and makes things bigger or more terrible than they actually really are. And sort of kind of managing that, and kind of really working with that, and really like journaling and, you know, kind of writing things that worked well and, you know, that were exciting on any given day. I think that really sort of helps me, because it's easy to be completely overwhelmed and feel like everything is falling apart. But like I've been actually, and that's in a way that's sad, but I've been very surprised how many things I find each day actually that have been awesome, and that I can really genuinely, like from the bottom of my heart, be grateful for.
Yeah.
And I've also, you know, really learned to lean on my wonderful co-founder, who I need to mention again. No, but you know, but it's just kind of, you know, really also, you know, we're a team, and, you know, I'm just so I couldn't imagine a better person to be working with, because, you know, when I have these days, like, you know, we have very, very open communication, and, you know, I feel super comfortable being like, look, I just have a really bad day today, and, you know, like, I know it's gonna be fine again, but just like, you know, really very openly communicating where you're at, and sort of what might be affecting what's happening, I think is super important.
Yeah, no, I think that as mission-driven founders, and we're the same way at PocDoc, where we're trying to make a big difference in helping people reduce their risk of cardiovascular disease by being able to test themselves with their smartphone, or type 2 diabetes, and then liver health and kidney health, or even fertility. I think it's what's amazing is that you know that you're coming to work every day doing something that will make a big difference to a lot of people if you get it right. So I can totally empathize with that. But then, you know, it can get overwhelming sometimes. For
totally.
sure.
And, you know, especially like one thing also I speak a bit about sometimes, about like, you know, being a patient and an entrepreneur, because, you know, it's super hard to kind of, you know, switch off and compartmentalize, and there's patient Kathrin, and then there's entrepreneur Kathrin, and sort of how do they meet? And, you know, sometimes in VC meetings, I'm
is
like,
it hard? Is it hard for you because you're kind of like you're a consumer of your own product?
It's really, really hard. And, you know, like for me, I was like, when I was first diagnosed with PCOS, I was like, okay, I'm going to deal with this, and I'm you know, I'm not going to let this condition ruin my life. And then, you know, I sort of didn't think about it once I sort of figured it out for myself. And now it's like so present in my life. So, you know,
now it's your entire life, kind of.
It's pretty much my entire life. And so, you know, it's very, very strange to sort of make that shift and learning how to deal with that. But, you know, in the end,
switch off from it somehow sometimes.
And also obviously, you know, speaking more publicly about it, because it's so important to, just destigmatize this. And I'm still learning to be a better spokesperson also for PCOS, and, you know, kind of.
I got to be honest, I think you're a pretty good spokesperson of PCOS. I think you're doing a great job in my, you know, sort of neutral capacity.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate that. But it's like, you know, just like also moving from patient that's been more or less hiding the disease or like the condition to like, you know, somebody that's out there sort of being like, look, this is okay. It's normal. It's 1 in 10 women. And we're building something that will hopefully make things a lot better for all of us.
Good. Well, look, on that note, thank you very much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear about FemTech Insider and Perla Health and everything that you're doing to treat the 1 in 10 women, so millions and millions of women who are suffering from PCOS. And I hope that you can come back on again after you've raised loads of money in your next round and Perla Health is launched properly and integrated with the NHS and all of that good stuff. So thank you very much, Kathrin. Much appreciated.